Hey everyone, this week we're looking at the Sigma 105mm macro lens and how it performs on the Nikon Z7. So this week I've come out to a local area. I'm going to do a bit of macro photography and I'm specifically looking at the Sigma 105mm 2.8 macro lens. If you've seen any of my macro videos in the last year or so, you'll have seen me using this lens, but I've not done an actual dedicated video to it, so I thought that's what I'll do today. Otis is here as well, so we're going to have a wander around, see what we can find. There's some woodland as well, a bit further on, and I'm going to capture some images and talk a little bit about the lens as I go along, but specifically I want to talk about how it performs on the Z bodies. So in my case, the Nikon Z7. So initially I wanted to get the Nikon Z 105mm macro lens, and I tried that out at the photography show last year. Link up top to that video if you haven't seen it. And it's a fantastic lens. Unfortunately I wasn't able to get hold of it last year due to supply chain issues and things like that. So instead I got the Sigma. It's not available with a Z mount. However, you can get it for Nikon F mount, and it's available for other brands as well, such as Canon, Sony, etc. So obviously I got the Nikon F mount version, and that means I do need the FTZ adapter to mount it on the Z body. Now, one thing to note is I've got the original FTZ adapter. There's a second version now, and I believe the only difference with this second newer version is that it doesn't have a screw on the bottom so that you can mount your tripod plate on it. But I find it's really useful to mount the tripod plate there because it's quite a long lens when it's on the adapter, and that's quite a lot of weight to be hanging off the front of your camera. So being able to mount your tripod plate more in the middle between the camera body and the lens just gives you that extra little bit of stability. And that might seem like a small thing, but it's little things like that that make a big difference when you're doing macro photography. At the focal length you're using, and when you're really close up to your subject, a tiny little bit of movement can make all the difference. Like most Sigma lenses I've used, this does feel really well made, really nicely constructed. It's got a really nice silky matte finish, which is not going to help you take photos, but it does feel rather good. It's got one dial, which we can use for manual focus, and we've got 3 switches on the side here, and I'll talk about those in more detail later. It comes with a lens hood, which is quite good, and if you're using this on an APS-C camera, it does have an adapter which you need to use to make the lens hood work properly, probably to stop vignetting and things when you're using it on a crop sensor camera. It's not weather sealed, however I have used this in quite heavy rain and it hasn't caused too many problems. However, I wouldn't advise you to do so because it's not listed as weather sealed, probably just weather resistant. All the focusing is internal, so you're not going to get the lens extending, which is quite good, particularly if you're quite close to a subject and you don't want your lens to extend into your subject. And you do also have a readout here with feet and meters. And it generally feels quite manageable, and you can use this quite easily handheld as well as on a tripod. This is a full frame lens, it will work on full frame bodies. Obviously it'll also work on crop sensor bodies at a different perceived focal length. It can achieve 1:1 magnification, however you're not going to get that at all distances, so depending on how close you are to your subject, you won't always get 1:1. It'll go from f2.8 up to around about f36 on this camera, but again it is going to depend on how close you are to your subject. If you're really close, you might not get all the way down to f2.8, you might get a maximum of 5.6 for example. On this camera with the FTZ adapter on the Z7, I've had up to f36, so quite narrow, probably never going to use that anyway. You're going to get soft images, perhaps diffraction, but that is the maximum I've managed to get up to. And it will also depend on how close you are to your subject again. It'll take 62mm filters and it's got a minimum focusing distance of 31 centimeters. So again, with a 105mm lens, you might not want to get that close to your subject anyway, particularly if it's like an insect that's flying around, but it is nice to know that you can get that close if you want to. So as I said earlier, there are 3 switches on the side of the lens. The bottom one is optical stabilization, and you've got 3 positions. You've got off, which is obviously no stabilization at all. Position 1, which is your general stabilization. So if you're just taking pictures of static images and you don't want to have that shake, or you want to reduce it, position 1 is what you need for that. Position 2 is for if you're trying to capture moving subjects, so if you've got an insect that's maybe flying, quite difficult to get, but that'll help in position 2 with that kind of subject. Next up we've got the autofocus or manual focus switch, so it just takes you from autofocus to manual focus. Sometimes you really do need the manual focus, particularly if you're up close. It just helps you to get nice tight focus on your subject where the autofocus can't quite select it, particularly if you've got things like grass and twigs and things like that. It's quite hard for the autofocus to work out exactly what to focus on. And then finally you've got the range selector at the top here, so this is what focal range it's going to use when trying to use the autofocus. So if you've got a close-up subject, you're going to want to choose the far right position, which is 31 centimeters up to about 45 centimeters. And then if you've got anything beyond that, you want to have it in the middle position, which is anything from 45 centimeters to infinity. Or you can choose the full option on the far left, which is going to give you the full range of focal length, but it will take longer to focus in that position. So I'll just give you a little example of what I mean. If we focus on this leaf just down here, and it's beyond 45 centimeters, so we'll see if I just try and focus on that now, the lens really can't find the focus. However, if I flick the switch to the 45 centimeter to infinity setting and now try to focus, we see that snaps on pretty quickly. So that's why it's really useful to use that range selector, just because it speeds up the focusing. And specifically when using this lens on the Z body, it's important to note how it interacts with the IBIS within the camera. So if you're using this with the OS switch set to off, there'll be no vibration reduction in the menu. You'll see that's just automatically turned off. And only when you switch it to either position 1 or 2 will you see that that vibration reduction has been activated in the menu, and you can't turn it on and off from the menu. You can only use the switch here on the side. Okay, so the rain's starting to come in now, a bit of cloud cover, it's getting a little bit dull. It's already quite dark in the woodland area. So I'm going to head back. I've got some images I can use now, I think. So we'll get these on the computer and we'll have a look at the optical quality. I'll see you back there. Okay, so back home now. That was really fun, really enjoyed getting those images, and I'm quite pleased with some of them, particularly the mushroom shots. So we'll have a look now at the optical quality of the Sigma 105mm macro lens. So if we take a look at this image, we can see that the sharpness is very good, particularly in the centre here. If we focus on this berry, really sharp, lots of clarity, good colours as well. And it's difficult sometimes to check the sharpness edge to edge with a macro shot, because most of the time your subject is going to be quite central to the frame and everything around that is going to be probably out of focus and blurry anyway. But we do have a little bit of detail down here in the bottom left where we've got these twigs, and that's mostly in focus, and we can see the sharpness is pretty good there as well. It's probably not quite as sharp as in the centre, but it's not bad, pretty good I'd say actually. And I can say that having used this lens for over a year now, sharpness is not an issue at all. You're always going to get really tack sharp images. The lens does have a super multi-layer coating, which is designed to help reduce flaring and chromatic aberration. A lot of the time chromatic aberration occurs when you have a lot of contrast with really fine edges. So you might get it with tree branches, for example. So I've chosen this image here to look at. This is unedited raw file, but we have got some twig-like elements in the background there, probably grass. And we can see that there's no aberration there whatsoever. There's no purples or greens or anything like that. So it does cope really well in that respect. Flaring, you are going to get lens flaring if you've got a strong light source shining directly into the lens. You can't really avoid that. I guess the coating does help a little bit, but try and avoid shooting directly into the sunlight or having your light source pointed directly at the lens. So finally, we'll look at bokeh. So bokeh is the quality of the background and how it's blurred out. So if we look at this example, we've got a really nice, smooth, blurred out background, which is really good for separating your subject. You can get rid of all those distracting elements and just focus on your foreground subject. Or in this example, you'll see we've got these really nice out of focus highlights. So this was achieved by having quite a strong light source. I was backlighting the mushroom with my LED panel, and with a fairly wide aperture, I think it was f7.1, that creates this really nice effect with these light balls, and they're quite round. We've got a rounded 9-blade diaphragm in the lens, and that creates this really nice attractive effect. So overall, I am really pleased with the Sigma 105mm DG macro HSM lens. It's served me really well over the last year or so, and I'm almost glad that I didn't end up getting the Nikon Z 105mm. I mean, don't get me wrong, that is an excellent lens, and for the short time that I was able to use it at the photography show, it worked great. It was really quick at focusing. I guess it's a lot faster than this lens because that is one of the downsides with the Sigma. It's slightly slow at focusing. And I guess on paper the Nikon Z is going to be sharper than this one. But in real world usage, you're not going to notice that difference very much. And yeah, the slower focusing speed of the Sigma hasn't been a big problem for me. Perhaps if you were trying to capture insects or things like that that are moving around, you might benefit from the extra speed. But given that this is much cheaper than the Nikon Z, I've been fairly pleased with it. So if you are considering looking at the Nikon Z, then also consider this one as well, particularly if you've got the FTZ adapter, because it does work really well on the Z bodies. So that's about it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching everyone, as always, really do appreciate it. If you're new to the channel and you're not yet subscribed and you'd like to do so, click down there on the big red button and you can subscribe, or over here on my face. That way you'll keep up to date with everything I'm doing each and every week. There's a new video every Sunday morning, 10 AM UK time. So I hope you'll catch me next week for the next one. But until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.